How you doing? My name is Wes. Today I'm painting a cow in watercolor. The reference photo is on the top right of the screen. Just a simple cow in a field, reclining. I'm sketching this out with paint, with diluted paint. With watercolor, it is a transparent medium, and so each layer of color, you'll be able to see the previous layers through it. Namely, you can't paint lighter colors on top of darker color. They will just be obscured. So it's usually safer to start with the lighter values first, and because you can always darken, it's much harder to lighten watercolor. As I'm working, at least what I should be doing, if I'm doing this correctly, is keeping kind of my working area wet as I go, so that the paint doesn't dry into crisp lines unless I'm ready for it to do that. And watercolor dries fairly quickly unless you add a lot of water. So as each of these edges, or the longer each of these edges sit there, the more of a chance it's going to dry into a crisp line. Like up at the top left, I've left that alone for quite a while. It's probably starting to dry by now. Not a big deal, but just you have to be aware of that as you go. And as you can see, this is still wet down here, so the paint, as I add it, kind of spreads and diffuses into the previous wet layers of paint. I'm trying to add as much color as I can in this first wash. It always dries lighter than what it appears to be when you first put it down, the colors. Another good practice in watercolor is not to overwork these layers. Better to let the layer dry and then come back later. But I haven't learned a lot of these lessons yet myself, so I most probably will be overworking this painting, mainly from inexperience with the medium. Again, I can see that dark purple kind of spread down below when I added it, which is just fine. I'm using just these three primary colors, yellow, red, and blue, and mixing any kind of color I want between those. And the darkest of those colors is probably the blue, followed closely by the red, and then the yellow's the lightest value hue. So by combining the blue and the red, you get a dark purple, which becomes kind of the black color of this image. In order to sell this and any painting as being realistic, you really need to spend some time looking closely at the shapes you're seeing in the photo. You can't really, you're not thinking of the shapes as things. Like, that's not an ear, it's just a little patch of orange with a little white under it and a shadow of a darker gray under that. Similarly, you wouldn't just paint a cow, you're painting a series of shapes. And that's just kind of the mindset to get you to paint what you actually see instead of what you think you see or think you should see. This goes for drawing and any kind of painting, really, if you're looking to get an accurate representation of the reference photo. This red is not that close to the orange on the cow. The cow has more yellow in that red, but for my purposes, I'm fine with this hue. And it's actually kind of true that it doesn't matter what colors you use, as long as you get the values right. You'll still be able to read the painting overall as what it should be. You can see that ear, and that left ear, as we're looking at it, it's kind of gone a little bit out wider than it should be, probably, but I'm not too concerned with that. A lot of this can be fixed even after it dries. Watercolor has a tendency to be able to be re-wetted and reconstituted back to a certain degree. It also depends on the paper and how long it's been sitting on the paper. I generally will find, like for instance, now I'm kind of hunting for the darker values that I see in the painting, and I'm kind of sticking with that one color, that one value, as long as I can until I've kind of found all those spots. Alright, this is returning back to the painting after it dries. Finding some more of these darker, shadowy areas. Of course, this is a little too dark for that area. I'm sure I'll lighten it up soon. You generally need to add more water to lighten the color. You can get white watercolor, but it's I generally avoid that. It just complicates things. The white that you see in this image, for instance, is the color of the paper. You're seeing the paper without any watercolor applied to those areas. So early on, I spent some time avoiding the areas I know I want to keep white, or even some areas where I've added a touch of shadow to. I try to avoid it early on until I know that I've kept those white. Here I'm adding more color to the ear. Again, I'm not too concerned with having the exact color I'm seeing in the reference photo. One trick you may have heard before, but it's good for painting and for drawing, is squinting at the reference photo or at the whatever your subject matter is. To when you squint, you kind of reduce the details. The details kind of disappear, so you can kind of get a sense of the major dark and light areas that you're looking at, and that kind of simplifies everything for you. You can see if that shadow, for instance, is as dark as you think it is, or if it's lighter than you think it is. By squinting, you're getting the essentials of the image. So, there's a lot of squinting and then kind of adjusting what I'm seeing on the reference photo to what I have in the painting. And of course, squinting kind of ignores color. I mean, the color, you can still see color when you're squinting. I'm just saying the main thing that changes is the details. And so the details fall away, and you kind of are left with just seeing the values of everything in relation to each other. In general, things in the foreground are going to be have more contrast and more color than the things in the far background. Oh, here I'm kind of adding a little liquidy paint and then blowing to get them to spread out like, as if they're weeds in the foreground. Again, you'll be able to see more details in the foreground objects in general, especially in landscapes like this. And I see that's a little much, so I kind of blend that out a bit, so it's not as aggressively textured there in the foreground. Adding more color to the, because there's a lot of yellow flowers in the painting. I'm not trying to add each one as I see them. I'm just, in general, randomly adding these flowers. I don't mind the painting as it looks now, other than it's a little underdefined in areas, and again, while that's perfectly fine, for my sensibilities, I tend to want to define things a little more. And that's the overworking the painting, I think. And also the hill with it's kind of missing. Those trees in the background really do really does tie everything together, I think. So I do add that later. Here in a minute, the video will end before I've lost the footage of the last bit of detail for this painting, but I'll show the finished painting in a moment. But I do end up, refining the face a bit and getting it a little more like the reference photo. So one thing I need to work on in my watercolor painting is lessening the overworking of the painting, making it a little more fresh, allowing it to be what it is. That said, this painting turned out just fine. I'm happy with it, and here you see the final painting as it sits. I hope you've enjoyed this painting process. I've been Wes, and I'll see you next time.